called me a traitor. I call it the memory I have to live with every single day. My name is Ava Mercer. I once wore the blue of the United States Air Force, proud and unbreakable. 7 years ago, my squadron flew into a desert sky over Syria and never came back. 5 souls vanished into fire and static. I was the only one who made it home. When the dust settled, the investigation began. They said I abandoned my team. They said I froze, that I lost control. That I ran. The truth was simpler and crueler. I stayed. I fought until the comms went dark and the world turned red. I sent the final distress code, the one we all prayed we'd never use, and then the line went dead. Someone cut it, and someone made sure the record of that signal disappeared. They took my wings, my uniform, and my name. What they could not take was the memory of what really happened out there. You don't bury the truth by writing a report. You only make it harder to dig up later. For years, I tried to disappear. I taught flight mechanics at a small community college in Arizona. I learned to make coffee slowly, to sleep with the lights off, to answer only when someone said my first name and not my rank. But the ghosts never stayed quiet. Every night they came back, 5 voices caught between static and flame, asking why I lived when they did not. Last month, a message reached me from a base I swore I would never see again. They wanted a civilian instructor to train new officers on survival protocol. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the signature of the commanding officer, Douglas Kane. He was there that night. He's the one who gave the order that changed our flight path, the one who came home without a scratch. So here I am again, walking the same tarmac where my career ended, the same ground where the ghosts still whisper. I'm not here to reclaim a medal or a rank. I'm here to find the missing piece of that night and the man who buried it. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, you'll understand what comes next. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it comes quietly in the voice of someone who refuses to stay silent any longer. This is my story. It's about truth, loyalty, and the cost of silence. And maybe, if I'm lucky, it's about redemption. Stay with me. Hear what really happened. And if you believe that honor can still rise from the ashes, then join us. Subscribe to Military Revenge, because some stories deserve to be heard, especially the ones they tried to erase. When I drove through the gates of Fallen Air Base, the guard looked at my ID longer than he needed to. The hesitation was small, but it was there, like the pause before a verdict. Then he nodded, handed the card back, and said, "Welcome home, Lieutenant." The title slipped out before he realized I wasn't one anymore. I just smiled, thanked him, and pressed the accelerator. The air smelled of dust and jet fuel, the same mix that used to mean belonging. Now it tasted like rust on my tongue. I hadn't set foot here in 7 years, but every inch of this place was carved into me. The hangars lined in perfect symmetry, the control tower cutting through the horizon, the faint echo of engines warming up like a heartbeat you can't quite forget. I parked near the training wing. The sun was brutal, glaring off the metal frames of parked aircraft. My reflection in the glass door looked older, harder. My hair was shorter now, silver threading through the brown. My posture still betrayed years of discipline, even if I no longer wore the uniform. I wasn't here as Lieutenant Mercer anymore. I was here as a civilian instructor, a consultant, a ghost haunting the corridors of the past. Inside, the hallway buzzed with the kind of energy only rookies have. Laughter, bragging, the clatter of boots. They didn't know me, not really, but they'd heard the stories. The fall of Ava Mercer, the pilot who crashed her own career. The classroom smelled like metal polish and coffee. A dozen officers stood as I walked in out of habit, then they realized they didn't have to. A few sat down a bit too loudly, the scrape of chairs sharp in the silence. At the end of the row, Major Douglas Kane leaned back in his chair, arms folded, that same smirk I remembered. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray at the temples, but his eyes were just as cold. He didn't stand. He just said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Didn't expect they'd send you to teach survival." The room shifted, that uncomfortable mix of curiosity and cruelty. Someone chuckled. Another whispered something I couldn't catch. I met his eyes and said evenly, "You'd be surprised what I survived, Major." His smirk faded a little. I turned to the class and began. "Protocol isn't about perfection," I said. "It's about what you do when everything falls apart. When the sky turns into fire and you're alone. That's when the manual stops and instinct takes over." Instinct? I paused, letting my gaze sweep the room. Can't be faked. Somewhere in the back, a cadet whispered, "Guess you would know." Another ripple of laughter. I didn't react. You learn not to. Teaching used to come easy to me back when my wings still meant something. But now every slide, every chart about crisis management was a mirror. They were learning theory. I had lived the aftermath. When the class ended, most of them filed out, talking in low voices. Kane stated. He leaned against the desk, the kind of posture that said this isn't a conversation, it's a test. You really think you belong here? He asked. I'm not here to belong, I said. I'm here to do my job. He laughed softly. Funny, that's what you said the night you got 5 people killed. Something cold snapped inside me, the way metal breaks cleanly under pressure. I took a slow breath. You were there, remember? You gave the coordinates. His smile thinned. Careful, Mercer. You start throwing accusations like that again, someone might think you haven't moved on. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint scent of aftershave mixed with arrogance. You're right, I said. I haven't, not until the truth does. He stared at me for a long moment, still chasing ghosts. I met his gaze. Some ghosts deserve justice. He turned and walked out, leaving his words hanging like smoke. That night, I stayed late in the office they'd assigned me. The walls were bare except for a photo of a C-130 against a desert sky. The hum of the fluorescent light made the silence heavier. I logged into the base's training system to review the next day's materials. Old habits die hard, and my fingers found the backdoor protocols like muscle memory. It started as curiosity, but curiosity in the military is a dangerous thing. I typed in the old mission code, Operation Skyfall. My access was supposed to be restricted, yet somehow the firewall didn't stop me. It opened almost like someone had left the door ajar. The files were mostly redacted, thick black lines over everything that mattered, but there was one data stream that caught my eye, a radar log timestamped 3 minutes before the crash. The signal identifier was mine, Echo 17, the last message I sent before the line went dead, except in this version. The log ended 2 minutes earlier. The transmission was missing. Someone had edited the file. I leaned back, pulse quickening. I could feel the room shrinking, like the walls were listening. I copied the log onto a portable drive and shut everything down. Years of discipline kicked in. Clean screen, clear trace. No evidence I'd ever been there. When I stepped outside, the desert air had cooled. The stars above Fallen were bright and merciless. I used to love that view. Tonight, it felt like being watched. The next morning, I found Kane waiting in the hangar. He was standing with 2 other officers, laughing. But when he saw me, his grin vanished. He said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, I keep forgetting whether to call you Lieutenant or Miss Mercer. Guess it depends which story we're telling today." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel so much as uncertain. People didn't know whether to side with him or stay silent. I smiled just enough to make him uncomfortable. "You don't need to call me anything," I said. "Respect isn't in a title. It's in how you act when no one's watching." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he clapped his hands once. "All right, class," he said to the group. "Let's see if our guest still remembers how to fly." He led the officers toward the flight simulator bay. I followed. Inside, the massive curved screens glowed pale blue, the hum of machines filling the air. The scenario loaded: engine failure, low altitude, enemy radar lock. The kind of nightmare no one forgets. "Show them how it's done, Mercer," Kane said. I climbed into the cockpit, the controls too familiar, too dangerous. My hands hesitated only once before gripping the throttle. The simulation started, alarms blaring, red lights flashing. I moved through the checklist, fast, precise. Pitch correction, flaps, emergency comms. The aircraft dove, then steadied. 70 seconds. Altitude recovery at 100 feet. I could hear the cadets murmuring behind me. 90 seconds, complete stability. I killed the engine, reset, exhaled. Silence, then a single clap. One of the younger pilots whispered, "Holy hell." Kane folded his arms. "Impressive. Shame it didn't go like that in Syria." The words hit like shrapnel, but I didn't flinch. I stood, removed the headset, and faced him. "You're right," I said quietly. "In Syria, the difference was someone tampered with the system." The hangar went still. The laughter died. Kane's smile froze. "You might want to be careful with what you imply," he said. I nodded. "You too." I left before he could answer. Outside, the desert wind picked up, lifting dust into thin spirals. I could feel something shifting, like the ground beneath my feet was remembering the truth before anyone else did. Back in my quarters, I pulled out the portable drive. I opened the copied file again, watching the code flicker across the screen. Hidden deep in the metadata was a name, D. Kane, not as the author, but as the last editor. My stomach tightened. I saved a screenshot and encrypted it with a passphrase only I would remember. Then I did what every soldier learns to do when the world starts spinning again. I sat still, breathed, waited. That night sleep wouldn't come. The air felt heavy, alive with memory. I thought about the 5 who never came home. Sergeant Voss, the calmest man I ever knew. Captain Ellis, who carried pictures of his twins in his vest pocket. Ramirez, who used to sing country songs over the comms. And Harper, my co-pilot, my best friend. I could still hear her voice. "We'll make it, Ava, we always do." But we didn't. I rose from bed and walked outside. The night was cool, a faint hum from the hangars in the distance. Somewhere an aircraft engine started. That low rumble used to comfort me. Now it sounded like a heartbeat trapped underground. Sometimes the past doesn't die quietly. It waits, patient as a sniper, for you to step back into its sights. And here I was, right where it wanted me. There's a saying we used to have in flight school. You can't outfly your shadow. No matter how high, how fast, it always keeps up. I think that's what this was, my shadow finally catching up. If you've ever tried to rebuild a life out of ashes, you know how fragile peace really is. All it takes is one memory, one voice, one old ghost whispering your name, and you're back in the cockpit again, racing the clock. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. The truth was buried deep in the radar system, somewhere between corrupted lines of code and forgotten reports. I wasn't sure how much evidence remained, but I knew where to start looking. The old data vault beneath the East Hangar, sealed after the Skyfall inquiry. Only senior officers had clearance back then. Kane was one of them. I still had my old access card, the one they never deactivated completely. Maybe they thought I'd never come back. They were wrong. The East Hangar sat on the far edge of the base, half buried in sand and secrecy. Most people had forgotten it even existed. To me, it was the grave where the truth had been left to rot. I parked in the shadow of an old maintenance shed and waited until the night crew finished their rounds. The air smelled of jet fuel and rain that never came. When the last vehicle disappeared down the road, I slipped out and crossed the tarmac, keeping low. Years of training never really leave your body. Every movement was quiet, measured, purposeful. The vault door was exactly as I remembered, massive steel, keypad worn smooth from decades of use. I slid my old card through the reader. The green light blinked once, then again. For a moment, I thought it would reject me, but the lock clicked open with a tired sigh. Someone had forgotten to revoke my clearance, or maybe someone wanted me to find what was inside. The room was colder than I expected. Rows of outdated servers hummed in the dark, lights blinking like distant stars. Dust coated the consoles, but the machines were still alive, waiting. I sat at the nearest terminal and powered it on. The login screen appeared, pale blue and familiar. My fingers moved on instinct, typing commands I hadn't used since before the court-martial. The system groaned awake, scrolling through endless lines of archived data. Radar pings, mission logs, encrypted transmissions, all the ghosts of the past lined up in perfect military order. I searched the date, May 17, 2018, Operation Skyfall. The screen hesitated, then offered a list of subfolders marked Classified A3. Most files were locked, but one carried a strange symbol, an internal marker that meant it had been edited post-incident. I opened it. The data appeared as radar plots. A sea of dots moving across a digital desert. I watched our formation appear, 6 aircraft flying low and steady. Then right before the ambush, one dot veered off course. Mine, except I knew I hadn't changed heading. I checked the flight parameters. Someone had altered the coordinates by 15 miles east, just enough to fly us straight into the enemy range. A chill crawled down my spine. Whoever changed it had access to the mission control feed. And the timestamp matched the exact minute Major Douglas Kane had been on comms duty. I dug deeper, tracing the metadata. Another name surfaced. Ross, Captain Aaron Ross, Kane's friend, one of the men who had supposedly died in the crash. But if Ross had died, how had his ID been used to access classified systems a month later? My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the drive and backed up everything. I didn't have proof of intent yet, but I had enough to know this wasn't a simple mistake. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I froze. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. I turned, heart hammering. A figure stepped from the shadows, flashlight beam catching my face. Man, what the hell are you doing down here? It was Sergeant Neal, base technician, younger than I remembered, or maybe just less broken. He lowered the flashlight when he recognized me. Lieutenant, sorry, Miss Mercer, I didn't expect anyone here this late. Neither did I said quietly. You still working night maintenance? He nodded, uneasy. Mostly system audits. They said the East Vault was off limits. Guess that's not true anymore. I studied him. The nervous way he avoided my eyes. You were on radar the night of Skyfall, weren't you? He hesitated. Yeah, but I was just a junior tech back then. I didn't see much. You saw enough to know something didn't add up. He looked away. I heard rumors that the transmission log was changed, but I was told to keep my mouth shut. Who told you? His voice dropped. Major Kane. There it was, the name that kept bleeding through every layer of silence. Listen. Neil, I said, stepping closer. I found part of the radar log. It shows tampering. I need your help to trace the source before it disappears again. He swallowed hard. If I help you, I could lose my job. If you don't, more good people will lose a lot more than that. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of servers. Then he nodded. All right, but we do this fast. We worked side by side, our screens glowing pale in the dark. Neil bypassed the new security layer and accessed a hidden partition. Inside were encrypted files labeled Command Review. He ran a decryption script, fingers flying. Lines of text appeared, emails, memos, internal notes. One message stopped us cold. It was from Kane to a contractor named Dominion Aerosystems, dated 2 days before the mission. Subject line, revised flight path approved, compensation confirmed. My stomach turned. Dominion was a private military company, notorious for supplying black market drones in the Middle East, and Kane had authorized our route through their territory. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. He sold us out, I whispered. Neil whispered back, we need to get this to command. Not yet, I said. If we move too early, it disappears. We need a backup. He handed me a data stick. Here, everything's mirrored on this. Keep it safe. As I reached for it, the lights flickered. Then the alarm blared, a low, pulsing siren that filled the room. Neil's face went pale. They know we're in. Shut it down, I ordered. He yanked the cables, killed the power. But the door lock clicked from outside. Someone was coming. I slipped the drive into my pocket, motioned for silence. Bootsteps echoed in the hallway, steady, confident. Kane's voice followed, calm and cutting. You always did like midnight missions, Ava. Neil froze. I stepped forward, blocking his view. Kane stopped at the doorway, the dim emergency light carving shadows across his face. You're trespassing, he said. That's a federal offense. So is tampering with classified flight data, I replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You don't know when to quit, do you? I quit the day you let them die. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his expression, guilt or maybe pride. Careful, he said softly. You're not the only one with ghosts. Then he turned to Neil. Sergeant, you're out of line being here. Leave us. Neil hesitated, glancing at me. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. He slipped past Kane and disappeared into the corridor. Kane stepped closer. You think you can rewrite history, Ava? You're just a washed-out pilot with a grudge. Maybe, I said, but I still have the truth. He laughed quietly. Truth doesn't matter without proof, and proof has a way of vanishing. I didn't answer, my pulse slowed, cold focus taking over. Then I guess I'd better keep it somewhere you can't reach. Kane tilted his head, studying me. You really believe anyone will listen to you after what you did? I met his gaze. They will when they see your signature on that Dominion contract. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut air. His jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, maybe, but it's mine to make. He turned to leave, stopping at the door. I'll pretend I didn't see you here tonight. Go back to teaching your little safety lectures. Leave the past where it belongs. I waited until his footsteps faded, then exhaled the breath I'd been holding. My hands shook, but not from fear, from anger contained too long. Outside, the night wind had shifted. The desert smelled like electricity before a storm. I drove back to my quarters with headlights off, replaying every word he'd said. He wasn't just covering his tracks, he was daring me to dig deeper. The next morning, the base was buzzing. Rumors about a security breach spread fast. I kept my expression neutral through every briefing. No one suspected me, at least not yet. At lunch, Neil found me in the cafeteria. He looked exhausted. They're scrubbing the servers, he whispered. Everything we pulled last night might already be gone. Not everything, I said, patting my pocket. We've got the backup. He glanced around. What's the plan? I thought for a moment. We need an external timestamp, something official that proves these files existed. Neil frowned. The only way to do that is through the base's satellite uplink, but that system's monitored. Then we move fast. that evening. I met him near the comms tower. The sun was sinking, painting the desert blood red. Neil climbed the service ladder, connected a portable router. I uploaded the encrypted data to a private secure server off-site, logging the exact time. It took less than 2 minutes. When it finished, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The truth was finally breathing again, but victory never lasts long. The next day, I was summoned to Kane's office. He sat behind the desk. Papers spread neatly, the picture of command. "Sit down," he said. I stayed standing. He sighed. "I got a report of unauthorized system activity last night. Care to explain?" "I was updating training software," I said. "Interesting," he replied, "because the system flagged a data transfer at exactly 2100 hours, and the only 2 people logged on were you and Sergeant Neil." I didn't blink. Maybe the system's mistaken. He leaned forward. "You really want to play that game? You've already lost once." His words hit like sandpaper, rough and deliberate. I could feel the trap closing, but I didn't flinch. "What do you want, Kane?" He smiled slowly. "I want you to stop digging. Walk away, Ava. You've got nothing left to prove." "You're wrong," I said. "I have 5 reasons." Something cold flashed in his eyes. He stood, towering over the desk. "This is your last warning." I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You know the thing about warnings, Major. They sound a lot like fear." That night I met Neil again, this time off base in a diner just outside town. The neon lights flickered, painting the windows pink and blue. "You think he's going to come after us?" Neil asked. "He already has," I said, "but we're not done. I need to confirm what Dominion paid him for." Neil rubbed his face. "That data's in the Pentagon archives, Ava. You can't just walk in there." "I don't need to," I said. "I just need one person who still believes in me." He looked skeptical. "Who would that be?" "Colonel Miriam Thorne," I said. "She was on the inquiry board. She never believed the final report." "Does she still serve?" "She's retired, lives in Colorado Springs, but she owes me a call." I pulled out an old phone, the kind I'd kept for emergencies. Thorne answered on the 3rd ring, her voice steady as ever. "Mercer, I wondered when you'd come back from the dead." "I need your help," I said. "I heard about the breach," she replied. "You're playing with fire." "I found proof, Miriam. Kane doctored the flight path. Dominion paid him off. I have the data." A pause, then her tone softened. "If that's true, you'll need to handle it carefully. They'll bury you before they bury the truth." "I'm used to being buried." She sighed. "Send me what you have. I'll verify it quietly." "I can't risk digital transfer. I'll bring it myself." "Ava," she said gently, "whatever happens next, don't do it alone." But alone was the only way I'd ever known. After we hung up, I sat there, watching the desert through the diner window. The stars were out again, cold and brilliant. Neil sipped his coffee, eyes heavy with worry. "You really think this will end well?" he asked. "I don't think it'll end at all," I said. "Not until someone pays the right price." Outside, a truck passed, headlights sweeping across the window. For a second, I saw our reflections, 2 people caught between truth and survival. It struck me how war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It just changes its uniform. The next morning, I packed a small bag, locked the data drive in a metal case, and booked a flight to Colorado Springs. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the desert shrinking beneath me. Somewhere down there, my ghosts were waiting. Justice was no longer a dream, it was a mission. And this time, I wasn't flying blind. The flight to Colorado Springs was short, but it felt like a lifetime. From 30,000 feet, the desert below looked like an open wound, quiet, endless, and scarred by the past. Somewhere under that sand lay the wreckage of my old life, twisted metal and silent names carved into memory. I closed my eyes, but the hum of the engines brought it all back anyway. May 17, 2018, Operation Skyfall. We were 6 aircraft strong, flying under radio silence. The sky was a bruised purple, the kind of color that tells you something terrible is coming. I remember the voice in my headset, Captain Ross, steady, confident, too confident. "Lieutenant Mercer, your altitude's drifting." I checked the gauges. "Negative, I'm holding steady at 2,000. "Not what my radar shows," he said, a note of irritation in his voice. "Then your radar's lying." The tension between us had been building for weeks. Ross didn't like taking orders from a woman, especially one ranked just below him but commanding the squadron that night. He thought leadership was about loudness. I thought it was about keeping people alive. We were 15 minutes out from the drop zone when the static hit. A burst of noise swallowed the channel, sharp and unnatural. I called for a systems check, but before anyone could respond, our instruments went wild. the radar filled with red. Enemy positions lighting up where there shouldn't have been any. I ordered evasive maneuver Alpha 7. Ross refused. "We're not aborting," he snapped. "We stay on course." That decision cost 5 lives. The explosion hit my left wing first. Metal screamed. The cockpit filled with smoke and fire. I remember trying to stabilize, my hands slipping on the controls. The horizon spun, and I saw Ross's aircraft ahead of me burst into light, a flare of impossible brightness. Then nothing but silence. Somewhere between the chaos and the dark, training took over. I keyed the emergency beacon and whispered a single code, Echo 17. It was the signal for immediate extraction, used only when all else had failed. It should have triggered a response within minutes. No one ever came. When I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, they told me my squadron never made it back, and the black box data gone, erased. That was the night the name Ghost Lieutenant was born. Now, sitting on the plane years later, I could almost hear that code echoing in my head. Echo 17, a ghost call from the dead. By the time I landed, the sky had turned gray and heavy. The mountains around Colorado Springs rose like old sentinels, watching, waiting. Colonel Miriam Thorne met me at a small cafe near the base. She was older now, hair silver at the temples, but her eyes hadn't changed. "You look the same," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I doubt that," I replied. She smiled faintly. "You always were terrible at small talk." I pulled the data drive from my jacket and set it on the table between us. "This is what I found." She didn't touch it yet. "Tell me what you're hoping to find, Ava." "The truth," I said simply. "I think Kane and Ross altered the mission data. There's a missing transmission, my distress signal, Echo 17. It's not in any of the official logs." Thorne frowned. "That code hasn't been used since the Cold War. Are you sure you sent it?" "As sure as I'm sitting here." She finally picked up the drive. "All right, I'll verify it through a secure channel, but if this data is real, you'll be stepping on very high toes." "I've already been stepped on," I said. "Might as well stand up this time." She nodded slowly, respect flickering in her expression. "Give me 48 hours. I'll reach out once I've seen what's inside." We parted ways in the parking lot as she walked away. I noticed how her shoulders carried the same quiet weight all soldiers learn, the burden of knowing too much. That night, I checked into a small motel near the airfield. The place smelled of bleach and rain. I sat by the window, watching headlights sweep across the empty lot. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I opened my laptop and began combing through old communications databases, looking for any trace of the Echo 17 code. Most of the archives were sealed. But one declassified log caught my eye, a maintenance test from the same week as the crash. Buried in the data was a fragment of a signal that matched the old distress pattern, but the source field had been manually deleted. Only a single line remained: received 2341 GMT, erased by Gen Auth ID 0094, general authorization. That wasn't an accident. Only a flag officer could execute a data purge at that level. Someone far above Kane had covered this up. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The ghosts had just whispered another name into the dark. The next morning, I called Neil. He answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "You're alive, good sign." "I found the Echo 17 trace," I said. "It was erased under a general's ID. Which general? I don't know yet, but it happened at the same time Dominion Aerosystems signed that private drone contract. There's a connection." Neil exhaled sharply. "You think Kane was taking orders?" "I think he was following someone's paycheck." He was quiet for a moment. "What's the next step?" "Dig deeper. I want to know who authorized that deletion. And I need your help getting into the off-site communication logs." "You realize you're talking about hacking a federal defense network, right?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "You said that like it's something new." By dusk, Neil had set up a secure link through an encrypted relay. The interface looked like something out of another lifetime: black screen, green text, the hum of forbidden knowledge. We scrolled through layers of classified logs, each more protected than the last. When the line finally broke open, we found the full metadata chain for the erased signal. The user ID belonged to a General Harlan Pierce, Chief of Operations during Skyfall. Pierce had retired quietly in 2020, no scandal, no noise. But there was one strange detail. 6 months after the incident, he joined the board of Dominion Aerosystems. I leaned back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. He didn't just erase my signal, he buried an entire operation. Neil cursed under his breath. This goes way higher than we thought. It always does, I murmured. We documented everything, timestamped and encrypted. The evidence was damning enough to reopen a military tribunal if it saw daylight, but daylight had never been kind to people like me. Before logging off, I typed one last note to myself: truth needs witnesses. Don't die alone this time. The following afternoon, Thorne called. Her voice was low and urgent. Ava, meet me at the old observatory outside the base. I can't talk over the phone. When I arrived, she was waiting in her car, engine running. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. You were right, she said. The files are genuine, but there's more. The Echo 17 transmission was intercepted, not deleted. It was rerouted to a private satellite relay owned by Dominion. My breath caught. Intercepted by who? By someone using Ross's clearance code. The world tilted for a second. Ross died in that crash. Thorne looked at me steadily. Did he? For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind howled through the empty observatory dome, whistling like static through an old radio. Somewhere in that sound, I could almost hear the faint echo of my distress signal calling across the years, still waiting to be answered. Thorne gripped the steering wheel. If Ross survived, he's either in hiding or protected. And if Dominion had his clearance, it means they had military cooperation from the inside. I nodded slowly. And Kane was the bridge. Thorne exhaled. You can't take this public yet. If they realize you're onto them, they'll erase you again, permanently this time. I stared out at the horizon where the mountains bled into the clouds. Then I'll move faster. She handed me a small flash drive. This contains a cross-check of the metadata you gave me. Proof the Echo 17 signal existed. Hide it somewhere safe. Don't contact me until you have something solid on Ross. I took it, closing my fist around the metal. Thank you, Miriam. Her eyes softened. You always did chase ghosts, Ava. Just make sure this one doesn't catch you first. As I drove away, the storm clouds began to gather again, dark and heavy. Somewhere in that gray silence, I knew the past wasn't finished with me yet, not by a long shot. The road from Colorado Springs stretched into miles of quiet emptiness, the kind of silence that forces you to listen to yourself. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on the flash drive in my pocket. It felt heavier than it should have, like a secret carrying its own gravity. That night, I stopped at a roadside diner outside Pueblo. The sign flickered weakly in the dark, half the letters gone, just enough left to spell Din-Ar. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and oil. I sat in the corner booth where I could see the parking lot through the window. Old habits, Neil called as I stirred my coffee. You're a hard woman to track down. I learned from the best, I said. He hesitated. I got something. Remember the Dominion relay that caught your Echo 17 signal? I traced its receiving channel through a civilian ISP in Nevada. I frowned. Nevada, Dominion's East Coast based. That's what makes it strange. The relay was rerouted through a data farm outside Henderson, officially shut down in 2019. But the logs show activity as recent as last week. Guess whose encryption key was used? My stomach tightened. Ross, exactly, but it gets weirder. The IP address links to a private defense consultant registered under the name Daniel Cross. I almost dropped the phone. Cross, I repeated. That's a lazy alias. Yeah, just enough to fool someone who wasn't looking. But the biometric signature attached to the encrypted key. That's him, Ava. Ross is alive. The diner suddenly felt too small. The hum of the lights, the clink of silverware, all of it faded beneath the rush of blood in my ears. Send me everything you have, I said. I already did, Neil replied. But you need to be careful. If he's alive, he's not the same man you knew. He was right. The Ross I remembered had been arrogant, fearless, but loyal to the chain of command. The man behind this cover-up had traded loyalty for something darker. That night, I rented a car and headed west. The highway stretched out like a scar under the moonlight. Every few miles, I checked the mirror, half expecting headlights that never came. By dawn, I crossed into Nevada, the desert turning gold under the sun. The data center was exactly where Neil said it would be, a cluster of low concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fence and dust. The sign reads Sandstone Logistics, but there was nothing logistical about the place. No trucks, no guards, no noise, just emptiness. I parked half a mile away and approached on foot. The front gate lock had been replaced recently. New hardware on an old Ghost. I found a gap in the fence and slipped through. Inside, the air was stale and dry. Rows of server racks stood silent, their lights long dead, but in the center of the room, one terminal still glowed faintly, a pulse of blue against the dark. I sat down and connected the flash drive. The system recognized it immediately. A security prompt appeared, followed by a list of archived transmissions. The last entry froze me where I sat. Echo 17 received May 17, 2018. Reassigned to Operation Helix. Authorized by D. Cross. Ross hadn't just survived, he'd taken my distress signal and turned it into something else. I opened the file. Inside were satellite images, encrypted logs, and mission updates from a series of covert drone strikes that took place after Skyfall. Civilian casualties, unauthorized zones, every strike executed under the alias D. Cross. My throat tightened. You used our deaths, I whispered. You built your empire on them. Behind me, the floor creaked. Always did talk too much to yourself, a voice said. I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight and dust, Captain Aaron Ross, or whatever was left of him. He looked older, harder. The boyish arrogance was gone, replaced by a calm, dangerous stillness. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Hello, Lieutenant, he said softly, or should I say civilian consultant Mercer. I didn't move. You should be dead. He smiled faintly. So should you. I took a slow breath. You rerouted the signal. You sold us out. He shrugged. I adapted. The mission was never meant to succeed. Skyfall was cover for Helix, a joint operation between Dominion and certain branches of command. You were never supposed to know. 5 people died, I said. Collateral, he replied, voice flat. You of all people should understand that. Collateral doesn't have names, I said. They had families. He tilted his head. You think this is about betrayal? It's about survival. Dominion paid to erase us from the record. I just made sure I wasn't one of the erased. I could feel the old rage rising, the kind that starts low and steady before it burns. You used my code, I said. You used Echo 17. Your code saved my life, he said quietly, and it's about to end yours. Something shifted in the air, the faint click of a safety being disengaged. I dove behind the console as the first shot hit the metal frame. Sparks exploded. I crawled low, pulled the sidearm from my boot, an old habit I never truly abandoned. Ross fired again. The bullet tore through the cables beside me. Smoke filled the air. I rolled, fired once. The shot hit the wall near his head, close enough to make him duck. Still got the aim, he called out. Still got the ego, I replied. We circled each other in the flickering light. He looked almost sorry as he raised the gun again. I didn't want it to end like this. Then don't pull the trigger. He hesitated for just a second, long enough for me to slam the emergency switch on the wall. The power cut. Darkness swallowed the room. In the dark, war becomes instinct. I moved silently, counting my steps, listening for his breath. He fired blindly, the flash lighting up the servers in strobe bursts. I caught his arm as he passed. Twisted hard, the gun fell. We struggled, bodies colliding in the dark, both too stubborn to quit. Finally, I shoved him against the rack, my weapon pressed to his chest. Why, Ross? I demanded. Why take the deal? He gritted his teeth. You don't get it. Dominion wasn't the enemy. They were the next phase. The military's been outsourcing everything, missions, intelligence, control. Pierce saw it coming. I just got ahead of it. You killed your own people to get ahead. My eyes unflinching. There's no clean way to survive a dirty war. I stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. Survival isn't clean, but it doesn't have to make you filthy. Before he could react, I hit the door release and bolted. I ran into the sunlight across the sand, lungs burning. Behind me, I heard him shouting, then the roar of an engine. A black SUV tore out from the side of the building. Kicking up dust, I jumped into my car and gunned it. The chase cut through the desert, wind howling, sun blinding. Bullets cracked against the rear window. One grazed my shoulder. I veered off the main road, cutting across a dry riverbed. The SUV followed, gaining fast. Ahead, I spotted a half-collapsed bridge, a relic of some old highway. I floored the gas. The car hit the edge, jumped the gap, landed hard on the other side. The SUV wasn't so lucky. It clipped spun midair and crashed into the ravine below. For a long time, I just sat there, hands shaking, the smell of dust and gasoline thick in the air. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, flames rising where the SUV had fallen. Part of me wanted to believe Ross was dead again, but something told me he wasn't the kind of man who died easily. By the time I reached the nearest town, my shoulder had stopped bleeding, but my mind hadn't stopped racing. I found a small clinic, paid cash, and had the wound stitched by a nurse who didn't ask questions. When I checked my phone later, there was one new message from an unknown number. It read, "You should have stayed buried. Helix isn't over. No name, no traceable source," but I didn't need one. The war I thought I'd left behind had just found its way home again. I sat there in the motel room, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. For the first time since the crash, I felt something close to fear. Not for myself, but for what would happen when the truth finally surfaced. Ross was alive, Dominion was still operating, and someone with stars on their shoulder was protecting them. But there's one thing I've learned after all these years: fear only has power if you give it breath. So I took a deep one, opened my notebook, and wrote 3 words across the page: Phase 2 begins. Then I looked at the camera on my laptop, the one I used for teaching online. The light blinked red, recording. My reflection stared back, older, scarred, unbroken. "You want to know what happens when they call a soldier a liar?" I said quietly. "They forget that some lies can still fight back." The desert sun rose hard and white when I returned to the base. It amazed me how the same sky could feel so different depending on what you carried beneath it. Years ago, that sky meant freedom. Now it felt like exposure. Rumors travel faster than orders on any base. By the time I stepped out of the truck, everyone already knew. They called it a training demonstration, but everyone also knew it was something else. It was a show, and I was the target. Major Douglas Kane had arranged it himself. He called it a leadership exercise for new officers, but it was really a trial dressed up as training. I walked across the tarmac with my civilian badge clipped to my vest. My scars hid under long sleeves. Recruits watched from a distance, whispering to each other. They had seen my photo in old reports. To them, I was not an instructor. I was the story they were warned about. Kane stood in front of the formation with the confidence of a man who never doubted his place. His medals caught the sun. He looked like the poster of what honor was supposed to be. He began with a calm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we will talk about the cost of hesitation and the difference between instinct and failure. Who better to demonstrate that than our guest instructor, Miss Ava Mercer?" The word "Miss" instead of lieutenant cut deep. It was small but sharp enough to draw blood. I nodded once and walked forward. My hand stayed steady, though my pulse beat too fast. Kane smiled as if we were both in on the same joke. He said, "I once commanded a flight unit under hostile conditions. Some of you may have heard the story. Not all of her team made it home. Today she will show us why." A few recruits looked down, others looked curious. He motioned toward the simulator behind him. It was a full cockpit mock-up surrounded by projection screens. You will run a simulated extraction under fire. Comms interference, system failure, 3 minutes to survive. I climbed into the seat, metal cold against my gloves. The screen glowed with that familiar green light. 3 minutes to prove what 7 years of silence could not. "Ready when you are," he said. I reached forward and took the controls. The simulation began with a roar. Alerts flashed red. Radar static filled my head. I mapped the terrain by instinct. The first missile warning came 12 seconds in. I banked left, dropped flares, and felt the vibrations shake the frame. The blast rolled behind me. I cut power and switched to manual control. Time stretched. Every motion came from muscle memory. Fire alert, stall correction, altitude drop, stabilize. 1 minute 38 seconds and I triggered the emergency descent and rerouted power. When the voice announced mission complete at 90 seconds, I exhaled. When I stepped out of the cockpit, the room was silent. Even Kane had lost his smile. 90 seconds, he said. That is a record. Records do not matter, I answered. People do. For a moment, no one moved. A young female recruit stepped forward and saluted me. The others stayed quiet. Kane laughed softly. "Impressive," he said, "but remember, Miss Mercer, real war has no reset button." I met his eyes. "No," I said, "but it has replay." The words stopped him for just a heartbeat. Then I walked past the line of recruits and out of the hangar. That afternoon, I sat alone in the maintenance bay watching the sun slide across the floor. My hands still trembled a little, not from nerves, but from remembering. 7 years of silence and shame had built a cage around me. For the first time, I felt it crack. By evening, I was summoned to Kane's office. The message came through official channels. When I arrived, he did not look up right away. When he did, his politeness was gone. "You think you humiliated me today," he said. "You did not. You embarrassed yourself." I did not say a word, I replied. That is what makes it worse, he said. You walk around pretending you belong, but you do not. You are a ghost. I looked at him and said, you know what ghosts do, Major. They haunt the guilty. He leaned forward. You are playing with fire. Then maybe you should watch your step, I said before turning toward the door. I paused. The footage from training is good material. Make sure you back it up. Would not want it to vanish like everything else around here. His expression changed slightly, and that told me I had hit the mark. Later that night, I met Neil in the storage bay. The place smelled of oil and dust. You should not provoke him, Neil said. I did not provoke him, I replied. I just reminded him cameras work both ways. He frowned. What now? I handed him a folder of documents. Radar logs, satellite intercepts, Dominion files. We are taking it to the Board of Inquiry, I said. Commander Thorne agreed to back the submission. Ava, if you go public, you will be marked, he warned. There already is a mark, I said. This time I choose when they pull the trigger. The following days passed like slow water. Paperwork, hearings, silence. I submitted every piece of evidence and signed the affidavit. For a brief moment, I believed justice might actually listen. The morning of the hearing, I wore a plain suit. It felt strange after years of uniforms, but it was all I had left that looked like armor. The panel sat behind a long table. Commander Thorne nodded slightly. Before it began, an assistant handed her a tablet. She looked down, then up at me with a flicker of alarm. The file you gave us, she whispered. The Echo 17 log. It is gone. Gone, I asked. Wiped, she said. No trace in the backup. For a moment, I could not breathe. Kane walked in, then smiling like a man who already knew the ending. The board called the session to order. He spoke first, telling his version with the ease of a man who never feared consequence. Operational failure. Pilot error. No distress signal ever recorded. The words hit like small knives, dull but steady. When it was my turn, I stood. You can erase data, I said. You can bury files, but you cannot rewrite what happened. 5 men died because someone changed that flight path, and the one who did is still in this room. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. The board thanked me for my statement and adjourned. Just like that, outside the wind smelled like rain. Neil waited by the truck. Tell me it went well, he said. They took everything I told him. How is that possible, he asked. Because they never lose control, I said quietly. Not unless we make them. That night, the first rain of the season hit the desert floor. I stood under it until I was drenched. Then I made a promise to myself. If they could erase proof, then I would become the proof. Chapter 3, The Mockery, Part 2. The night after the hearing, I could not sleep. The sound of rain against the tin roof was the same rhythm that used to lull me inside a cockpit before missions. It was supposed to calm me, but that night it only reminded me how silence could drown louder than engines. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the folder that once held my last piece of proof. Now it was nothing but paper and air. For years they called me a liar. Now they had the evidence to prove it, not by showing what was false, but by erasing what was real. I thought about leaving, packing up the few things I owned and disappearing somewhere the wind carried no rank and no memory. But ghosts do not get to leave until the story ends, and mine was still wide open. By dawn, I was walking across the airfield again. The rain had washed the ground clean, but I knew the stains beneath were older than weather. I stopped near the hangar where the training simulation took place. Inside, technicians were repairing the wiring on one of the mock cockpits. They nodded when I walked in. Most of them did not dare speak to me, but I saw respect in their silence. I climbed the metal stairs to the control booth and checked the digital recorder. The training session's footage was still there, 90 seconds, clear, precise, undeniable. I copied it onto a drive and slipped it into my pocket. Proof had a way of surviving when you hid it in plain sight. Later that morning, Neil found me in the mess hall. He looked exhausted. They transferred me to communications, he said quietly, effective immediately. I nodded. It was not a demotion. It was exile. Before he left, he placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a photo of our unit from Syria, faded, torn at the corners. On the back, he had written a single word, Echo. That night, I drove out past the perimeter fence. The desert stretched endless and empty. I parked near an old watchtower where the wind never stopped howling. It was the same place we used to run drills before the mission went wrong. I sat there and played the simulation video again on my laptop. The glow painted the inside of the truck pale blue. For a moment, it almost felt like flying again. I could hear the voices of my old crew, the laughter before takeoff. The steady hum of trust, then it shifted to static, the same static that swallowed their last words. I closed the screen and whispered to the dark, I am coming for the truth. A few days later, I received a message on an encrypted line. No sender, just coordinates and a timestamp. The location pointed to a warehouse near Tucson that used to store classified equipment from Operation Skyfall. I did not tell Neil. He would have tried to stop me. When I arrived, the place looked abandoned. A single bulb flickered near the entrance. Dust covered the floor, but tire tracks were fresh. I followed them inside. Rows of metal crates lined the walls. In the far corner stood a console, half-powered, still connected to the old radar network. I started searching through directories until I found a hidden subfile labeled Echo Archive. My pulse quickened. The logs were encrypted but recognizable. Buried inside was a transmission log dated the night of the ambush. The sender ID matched my aircraft. The code read Echo 17 confirmed, but another signature appeared right after. A second relay rerouted the signal. Origin unknown, destination marked classified private relay Kane. The room felt colder. I copied everything to a secure drive. Before I could disconnect, I heard movement outside, 2 sets of footsteps, then the click of a weapon being loaded. I turned off the monitor and crouched behind a crate. Voices came closer. A man said, "She's already here. Finish it quietly." The metal door slammed shut. My heart pounded so loud I thought they could hear it. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the small sidearm I kept hidden since the day I lost my wings. The same one that had saved my life once before. They split up, searching the aisles. I moved quietly between shadows, every sound amplified. When one of them passed by, I caught a glimpse of a patch on his arm, black insignia, no unit markings, contractors. The first man stopped near the console. He noticed the missing drive. Before he could speak, I stepped out. "Don't move," I said. He turned fast, raising his weapon. The shot echoed through the warehouse, and he dropped instantly. The second man fired from behind a crate. I ducked, rolled, and fired back. The noise tore through the stillness until everything fell silent again. Smoke hung in the air. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the memory of how it used to feel to fight for my life. I checked both men. No ID, no tags. Their phones were encrypted. One message thread remained open. It said, "Target confirmed. Mercer must not reach board." I left the warehouse before dawn, driving without lights across the open road. In the rearview mirror, the building faded into the horizon, but the truth followed me like a second shadow. When I reached the motel outside town, I called Neil using a secure channel. He answered in a whisper. "What happened, Ava?" "They sent people," I said. "Not soldiers, private, trained, connected." "To who?" "To Kane. I have proof now, the log, the relay, everything." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You need to hide." "No," I said, "I need to speak." The next day, I arranged a meeting with a journalist who specialized in military corruption cases. I used a pseudonym and sent her a fraction of the data, just enough to get her attention. She agreed to meet in Phoenix. When I arrived, the cafe was half empty. A woman in her 40s sat near the window with a laptop. She looked up as I approached. "Ava Mercer," she said softly. I nodded. Her name was Leela Price. She had written about veterans who vanished after whistleblowing. She listened as I told her everything. The ambush, the missing signal, the erased logs, and the men sent to silence me. She typed notes quickly, but her eyes never left mine. "You understand what this means," she said. "You are accusing a decorated officer of conspiracy." "I am not accusing," I replied. "I am remembering." She nodded slowly. "I can help you, but you need to disappear for a while. Once this goes public, they will come again." I left the cafe before sunset. On the drive back, I noticed a black SUV 2 cars behind me. It stayed there through every turn. I took a detour through an industrial district and lost sight of it for a while, but the feeling remained. When I finally parked outside the motel, my phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. It contained a single line: "You should have stayed buried with them." I looked out into the night. Somewhere out there, someone still thought I was the same woman they broke 7 years ago. They were wrong. I was not coming back to clear my name anymore. I was coming back to end theirs. The camera on my dash blinked red as it recorded. I leaned back and whispered to myself. They wanted silence. I am going to give them a storm. The rain started again that night. It hit the windshield in hard, steady beats like the ticking of a countdown. I knew what came next would decide everything. Not just for me, but for the ones who never made it home. Because ghosts do not disappear when forgotten. They rise when the living finally dare to remember. By the time the sun came up over Nevada, I was already driving north. The desert here was different from Arizona. The sand shimmered like glass, and the silence was thicker, as if the land itself held its breath. I followed a road that did not exist on most maps, one that led to an abandoned military storage facility hidden behind barbed wire and wind. The gate looked rusted, but it was still wired with sensors. I cut the power from a side panel I found years ago when the place was decommissioned. The lock gave way with a low click. Inside, the air smelled of iron and old rain. This was where the base kept its classified data backups, everything too inconvenient to destroy and too dangerous to remember. I walked through rows of steel cabinets until I reached a reinforced door marked with fading letters. Restricted Archive Division Echo. I almost smiled. They had buried the truth right under its original name. The keypad still worked. I entered the code I once used when I held rank. The red light blinked once, then green. The room opened with a hiss of recycled air. Inside, the servers hummed like a heartbeat long forgotten. It took hours to find what I was looking for. The files were buried beneath decades of encrypted logs. When the data finally decrypted, the screen flickered and played a single audio recording labeled Mission 47 Skyfall Debrief. Static first, then voices. My voice gives a routine check. Then Captain Ross confirmed visual contact. Another voice cut through, deeper and colder. Major Douglas Kane. He was not supposed to be on that channel. The transmission was short, but every second was poisonous. Kane ordered Ross to reroute our flight path. He told him to avoid detection by diverting over Sector 9, a region under rebel control. Ross hesitated, then obeyed. A minute later, gunfire erupted. The signal broke into chaos. The recording ended there, but another file appeared linked to it, a transaction log, weapons manifested through a private logistics company. I traced the name, Havoc Solutions, a private military contractor with a long history of government contracts and quiet scandals. That was it. Proof that the ambush was no accident. Proof that Kane had traded our coordinates to cover up an illegal weapons transfer gone wrong. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The room was cold, but my hands burned. Everything I lost, every insult, every whisper about betrayal, all of it had been built on his lie. I copied the files onto a portable drive, sealing them with a personal encryption key. My reflection on the dark monitor looked like a stranger. I whispered the words almost without meaning to. They will hear you now. Outside, the desert wind had picked up. Sand whipped across the truck as I pulled away from the facility. I kept checking the rearview mirror even though I saw nothing. Trust was a luxury I no longer had. By the time I reached the outskirts of Vegas, night had fallen. The neon lights blurred through the windshield like distant fires. I parked behind a diner and used a secure satellite connection to send the data to the office of General Alan Rourke, the current regional commander. He had once served as an ethics advisor during the Song Juan inquiry years ago. If there was one man who still believed in integrity inside the system, it was him. The transmission bar blinked slowly. 50%, 70, 90. Then it froze. For a second, I thought it was the signal. Then the dashboard lights dimmed. The truck engine stuttered and died. I looked outside. Two black SUVs turned the corner at the far end of the street, headlights cutting through the dust. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the drive, shoved it into my jacket, and slipped out through the back alley. They were fast, professional, not local police. I ducked between dumpsters and climbed over a fence into an industrial lot. A floodlight snapped on. A voice called my name through a megaphone, calm and practiced. Ava Mercer, you are under federal investigation. Drop your bag and raise your hands. Federal investigation. That was clever. I almost laughed. They wanted to make it look legitimate. I ran toward the far side of the yard where an old storage building stood half collapsed. Shots cracked behind me, sharp and dry. Metal sparks danced on the wall beside my head. I forced open a side door and slipped inside. Darkness swallowed everything. My breath came short. I crouched behind a stack of crates and listened. Footsteps, two men inside. They moved carefully, disciplined. Then a sound cut through the tension. A low hum from outside, an engine. A light swept across the window. Someone else was coming. A moment later, the door exploded inward. The intruders turned, weapons ready. A truck rammed through the outer wall, headlights blinding white. The driver's door opened and Sergeant Neal stepped out. He shouted, "Get down." Then he opened fire. The two men returned shots, but Neal's aim was faster. The room was filled with smoke and dust. When it cleared, the men were down and the only sound left was the engine idling. I stood slowly, still shaking. Neil looked at me, chest heaving. "You always did know how to find trouble," he said. "You always did know how to follow it," I replied. We drove west without headlights, letting the desert swallow us. When we were miles away, he finally spoke again. "You sent the files to command." I nodded. "Not all of them made it through. You think Rourke will protect you. He will protect the truth." He sighed. "I hope you are right." We stopped at an old weapons testing range near Groom Lake, a place so desolate even satellites ignored it. The night stretched wide and endless. Neil killed the engine. "What now?" he asked. "Now we wait," I said. He looked at me like he wanted to say more but did not. We sat in silence. Two ghosts of the same past. Sometime after midnight, my phone vibrated. An encrypted message from an unknown address. It contained one line: "Delivery received. Stand by for secure confirmation." Initials AR. Rourke had it. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe we might win. The desert wind carried a distant echo of thunder. Neil leaned back against the seat. "You think they will let you testify? They cannot stop me anymore," I said. "The proof is already moving faster than they can erase it." He smiled faintly. "Then hold on tight, Mercer. The storm's coming." He was right. I could feel it in the air. Something had shifted. But neither of us knew that by morning, the storm would come for us first. At dawn, the horizon glowed red, a thin line of fire cutting across the desert. I had been awake all night, watching the sky change. The silence before sunrise felt heavier than usual, as if the earth itself knew what was coming. Neil brewed coffee over a small camp stove. His hands were steady, but his eyes kept drifting to the road. Neither of us spoke much. We both understood that once the sun rose, we would no longer be shadows. The first drone appeared just after 6. It was small, silent, almost graceful as it hovered in the distance. Then another joined it. Neil cursed under his breath. "They found us," he said. We moved fast, loading our gear into the truck. The files I sent to General Rourke were our only hope now. If he acted before they reached him, maybe there was still a chance. But I had lived long enough to know hope was never a strategy. We took off across the dry flats, sand spraying behind the tires. The drones followed, their lights blinking like small eyes in the rising light. Neil turned toward me. "They will have ground teams closing in within the hour." I opened the laptop and checked the transmission tracker. The confirmation code from Rourke had vanished. That was not a good sign. If they intercepted him, the proof was as good as gone. We reached the old test site near Groom Lake before the sun reached full strength. The place was nothing but broken hangars and twisted metal left from a time when people still believed they could control everything they created. Neil parked behind a concrete barrier. We stepped out into the heat. The wind howled through the empty structures like a warning. He looked around and said, "I do not like this." Too open. Neither did I, but it was where the message had led us. Another encrypted ping had arrived during the drive. Coordinates, a simple note. "Deliver confirmation in person." Signed AR. We both knew what that meant. Either Rourke wanted to meet or someone was using his name. The sound of engines reached us before we saw them. 3 armored vehicles appeared over the ridge, sunlight flashing off their windshields. I recognized the insignia immediately. Not military, private, Havoc Solutions, Kane's men. Neil moved to cover. I checked the magazine on my weapon. 10 rounds, that would have to be enough. The vehicles stopped 100 yards away. Dust swirled around them. The doors opened and a group of men stepped out, armed, coordinated, and efficient. And in the center of them stood Major Douglas Kane, dressed in full uniform as if this were a parade instead of a manhunt. He called out across the sand, "You should have stayed gone, Lieutenant." I did not answer. He walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. "I will give you one chance to hand over the data. Do that and maybe you walk away from this." I raised my voice so he could hear. "You killed 5 men to protect a deal that was already dead. You stole their names and buried mine. You do not get to bargain with me." He laughed softly. "You think anyone will believe you? You are a ghost, a disgraced pilot with a story too convenient to be true." I took a step forward. "Maybe they will not believe me, but they will believe what they see." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I pulled a small device from my pocket, a portable projector the size of a book, the same one I had used during field briefings years ago. I set it on the hood of the truck and pressed the button. The sound of static filled the air, then the recording began to play. Kane's own voice echoed across the desert. "Reroute the flight. Sector 9, make sure the cargo clears before extraction. No witnesses. Every man on his team froze. The words hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Kane's face went pale. He turned to his men, shouting, "Shut it down, destroy it," but before they could move, another sound cut through the chaos. Engines, a convoy approaching fast from the east. Military transports this time, marked with the insignia of the United States Air Force. General Rourke had come. The trucks fanned out, surrounding the site. Soldiers spilled out, weapons raised. For a moment, the desert became a standoff of uniforms and shadows. Rourke stepped forward, gray-haired, composed, his presence enough to still the noise. "Major Kane, stand down," he said. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and obstruction of military justice." Kane tried to speak, but no sound came. Rourke turned to me. "Lieutenant Mercer, do you have the data backup?" I handed him the drive. "Everything is there, sir. The logs, the audio, the transaction records." He nodded once. "You did the right thing." I wanted to believe that, but I had seen too many right things turn into headlines that never changed anything. Kane broke free from the soldiers trying to cuff him. He lunged toward me, fury twisting his face. "You ruined everything," he shouted. Neil tackled him before he reached me. They hit the ground hard, sand exploding around them. The soldiers pulled Kane away, but not before he screamed over his shoulder, "You think this ends here? It never ends." I watched as they dragged him toward the transport. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Rourke approached again. "We will need your statement, Mercer, and I want you present at the official ceremony tomorrow. The truth needs a face." That night, as we camped near the base, Neil sat beside the fire, cleaning his weapon. He looked up and said, "You finally got what you wanted." I shook my head. "No, what I wanted died 7 years ago. This is just what is left." He nodded slowly. "Then make it count." The next morning, the airbase buzzed with tension. Reporters, officers, and recruits gathered for the swearing-in ceremony of the new class. The irony was not lost on me. The same hangar that once echoed with laughter at my expense now stood decorated with flags and cameras. General Rourke took the stage first. His words were steady, formal, the kind that history books remember but people rarely feel. Then he gestured for me to join him. As I walked to the podium, every eye followed, some curious, some doubtful, some filled with quiet respect. The microphone felt heavy in my hand. I began softly. 7 years ago, I was told I failed my team, that I abandoned them, that I was a coward. I carried that shame like a wound that never healed, but shame has a strange way of teaching you what truth really costs. I paused. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed to wait. I looked at Kane, sitting restrained among the officers. His expression was blank now, all arrogance gone. I continued. "The truth is not patriotic or political. It is human. It is the weight you carry when no one believes you and the strength you find when you refuse to stay silent." Then I said the words that had lived inside me since that night in Syria. I did not betray anyone. I betrayed the silence. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then the hangar erupted in sound. Applause, voices, movement. The noise rolled over me like a wave, but I hardly heard it. I was watching the light pour through the windows, touching the flags, the faces. The dust suspended in air. Rourke placed a hand on my shoulder. "The record will be corrected," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Records are written by people, sir. Let us hope they remember this one right." After the ceremony, Neil found me standing near the runway. Planes took off one after another, cutting across the sky like streaks of silver. He smiled. "So what now, Lieutenant?" I thought about it for a moment. "I think I will keep flying, even if it is just in my head." He laughed. "That is the Mercer I remember." We stood in silence, watching the last jet disappear into the horizon. For the first time in years, the sound of engines did not make my heart ache. It made me feel alive. Later that evening, I walked alone along the perimeter fence. The sun dipped low, turning the desert gold. I could almost hear the voices of my team carried on the wind, not as ghosts this time, but as memories that finally found peace. Justice does not bring back the dead. It does not erase the pain, but it gives meaning to the silence. When the first stars appeared, I whispered to the night, "You are free now, all of you, and maybe so am I." Then I turned back toward the base lights, toward whatever waited beyond revenge, beyond guilt, beyond the story that refused to die. Because survival is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of truth. The sky over the base looked different that morning. Cleaner, almost forgiving. Maybe it was just the way sunlight hit the hangar windows, but for the first time in years, I felt like the ground beneath me wasn't holding its breath. Kane was gone. They flew him out at sunrise under armed escort. The report said he would face a military tribunal for conspiracy, fraud, and the deaths of 5 servicemen under his command. They didn't use the word treason, but it hung in every sentence like an unspoken truth. The investigation spread quickly, tracing money, contracts, and names. Havoc Solutions collapsed within a week. Every news outlet ran the same footage of Kane being led away, face pale, eyes empty. For the world, it was the end of a scandal. For me, it was the end of a sentence that had lasted 7 years. General Rourke called me into his office the day the report was sealed. His desk was bare except for a folder and a cup of cold coffee. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sits deep in the bones. He said the board had reviewed my case. All charges against me were cleared. My record would be restored with full honors and rank. They were even offering reinstatement if I wanted it. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the patch on my old uniform folded neatly on his desk. My wings, the same ones I thought I'd never touch again. Rourke studied me for a moment. "You earned this back, Lieutenant," he said softly. I shook my head. "I didn't earn it, sir. I survived it." He leaned back. "Then what do you want, Mercer?" The question caught me off guard. For years, I'd dreamed of this conversation, but I never thought about what came after vindication. I looked out the window where a group of young cadets marched in formation, their faces bright with the kind of certainty I used to have. I said, "I don't want my rank back. I want something else." Rourke nodded slowly. "Go on. Reopen the female pilot training program. You shut it down after the incident. Bring it back. Let me teach." For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then he smiled, a rare and quiet smile. "You always were stubborn. I'll make it happen." It took months for the wheels to turn. The military doesn't change quickly, even when the truth is on its side, but piece by piece. Policy by policy, doors began to open again. While the lawyers and politicians cleaned up their mess, I stayed on base, helping where I could. I worked with the trauma unit, trained cadets on survival tactics, lectured on ethics in command. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the glass walls of the training room. The woman staring back wasn't the same pilot who once believed rank meant respect. She was older, scarred, quieter, but she was finally free. The press tried to reach me dozens of times. They wanted interviews, sound bites, redemption arcs. I turned them all down. Truth doesn't need an audience, just witnesses. One afternoon, while sorting through the archived flight logs, I found the names of my old team listed in the updated memorial record. Their ranks, their faces, their honors all restored. I traced my finger over each one, whispering their names like a prayer. Ross, Daniels, Keene, Alvarez, Bishop. For the first time, their story was written correctly. That evening, Neil joined me in the mess hall. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He had taken a permanent teaching post at the academy. Said he liked yelling at recruits more than dodging bullets. "You're still not used to the quiet, are you?" he said. I smiled. "Quiet's dangerous. Gives you time to think." He laughed. "You should try it more often." We sat for a while, just listening to the hum of the bass. He leaned forward. "You ever think about taking the offer, getting back in the air?" I looked at him and said flying was never the problem. Falling was. He nodded as if he understood exactly what I meant. Weeks later, the Air Force officially reinstated the women's tactical flight program. A small victory for some, but for me it was everything. They asked if I wanted to serve as an instructor. I accepted without hesitation. The first day of class, I walked into the training hangar wearing a plain flight suit. No medals, no patches. The recruit stood at attention, a row of nervous faces trying to hide excitement. I began with a story. 7 years ago, a flight team was ambushed in Syria. 5 didn't come home. 1 did. They called her a traitor. Turns out she was just early. The recruits smiled, unsure if they should laugh. I let them. They would learn soon enough that humor was just another form of armor. After the session, I stayed behind, walking between the simulators as the last light faded. The air smelled of metal and jet fuel. I touched the control panel of one cockpit, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingers. It felt like coming home to a house that had burned down and been rebuilt in secret. That night, I sat outside the barracks under the open sky. The stars looked sharper than I remembered. Neil joined me, handing over a thermos of coffee. He said, "You realize they'll probably name the next class after you." I shook my head. "Don't you dare. Let them earn their own ghosts." He chuckled. "Fair enough. We sat in comfortable silence after a while. He said, "Do you think the ones we lost would be proud of this?" I stared at the horizon for a long time. "Pride doesn't matter anymore, Neil. What matters is they're finally seen." He nodded. "That's enough." The next morning, the cadets ran drills before sunrise. I stood at the observation deck, watching their aircraft lift off one by one. Engines roared, slicing through the quiet dawn. The sound used to haunt me. Now it was a hymn. When the last jet disappeared into the sky, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, not as a soldier, but as a survivor. This time, they're flying free. The first day of official training began under a silver sky. A soft wind rolled over the runway, carrying the scent of oil, dust, and the faint sweetness of jet fuel. It felt like the breath of an old friend, sharp, familiar, and honest. I arrived early before the cadets, before even the sun had fully climbed. The hangar was quiet except for the ticking of the metal roof as it warmed. I walked past rows of simulators and flight suits, fingertips grazing the steel as if to remind myself this was real, not some fragile dream conjured from guilt and memory. By 7, the recruits began to file in. 13 women, all between 20 and 25, faces bright and tense, each of them pretending not to be afraid. I remembered that look. It was the same one I'd worn when I first stood in this very place, too young to understand that courage and fear often share the same heartbeat. I greeted them. Voice steady, "Welcome to Tactical Flight Training Alpha 1. You're not here because someone made space for you. You're here because you earned it." A few nodded, but most just stared, eyes wide, waiting for me to say more. I didn't. In the military, silence often teaches better than speeches. We started with basics, navigation drills, tactical maneuvers, emergency descent protocols. They struggled at first. The simulators were unforgiving, the commands precise. Some cursed under their breath, others gritted through mistakes. I watched quietly, resisting the urge to step in. They needed to fail before they could fly. By midday, the desert heat pressed against the hangar walls. Sweat pooled at the edges of their helmets. I called for break. We sat in a loose circle near the loading dock, water bottles clinking, laughter echoing in brief bursts. One of them, a tall redhead with freckles and fire in her eyes, broke the silence. "Ma'am, is it true they used to call you the Ghost Lieutenant?" The others turned to me, curiosity sparking. The name had floated through rumor and whisper, half myth, half cautionary tale. I could have brushed it off. Instead, I smiled. "Yes," I said, "they did." She hesitated. "Why ghost?" "Because sometimes when you lose everything, people forget you were ever real." The group fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold still. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "But here's the thing about ghosts. We don't stay buried. We haunt the truth until someone finally listens." The cadets exchanged glances. One of them whispered softly, "That's kind of badass." I laughed quietly, "Maybe, but it's not about being fearless. It's about showing up even when the fear still sits beside you." We spent the afternoon running mock flight missions. Their coordination tight and their confidence grew. By the third run, they were moving like a single mind. Watching them was like seeing my old team reborn, not the same faces, but the same pulse of determination. As the sun dipped behind the hangar, I dismissed them for the day. One by one they saluted, sweat-streaked and proud. When the last cadet left, I stayed behind, standing in the quiet glow of the setting light. I looked at the empty runway stretching into the horizon and thought about what had been lost and what had been restored. The Air Force had cleared my name, but that was never what I truly wanted. I didn't fight for a title. I fought so no one else would have to lose theirs unjustly. Later that night, a ceremony was held in the central hangar. It wasn't grand, no press, no speeches, just the way I preferred it. General Rourke stood before a small crowd of officers, cadets, and staff. He presented a folded flag to me, the same kind given to families of the fallen. "For the ones you brought home," he said quietly. I took it with both hands, feeling its weight. It was heavier than it looked, like it carried not just fabric, but memory, loss, and absolution. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the center of the hangar. The projector behind me showed a loop of sky footage, planes rising, formations shifting, light catching on steel wings. I waited until the murmurs died down. 7 years ago, I said, I sent a signal that never reached its destination. Echo 17. It was a call for help, buried under lies and fear. That night, I thought I'd failed everyone I ever cared about. I thought I'd become what they said I was, a coward, a traitor, a ghost. I took a breath, steady and calm, but ghosts have a purpose. They remind the living that the story isn't over. The crowd watched, unmoving. What happened here wasn't just about me. It was about every soldier who's been silenced because the truth was inconvenient. Every woman told she didn't belong because someone else couldn't handle her strength. A murmur rippled through the cadets standing near the front. I don't want medals or titles or my name written on walls. All I ever wanted was to make sure no one has to choose between honor and survival again. The silence that followed was full, not empty. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes on me, not in judgment this time, but in understanding. Then I said the line I had carried with me through fire, betrayal, and exile. I did not betray anyone, I betrayed the silence. The words echoed in the hangar, soft but indelible. For a moment, no one moved. Then the cadets began to clap, one by one until the sound filled the space like thunder breaking through clouds. That night, when I stepped outside, the air was cool and clear. I looked up at the sky, so wide, so endless, and felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Neil joined me at the edge of the runway. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, both of us watching the stars. Finally, he asked quietly, "So what now, Ghost Lieutenant?" I smiled. "Now we teach them to fly higher than we ever could." He nodded, and for a while we just stood there, the hum of the base around us, the night alive with the sound of engines preparing for dawn. Somewhere inside, I knew this was the real ending, not the vindication, not the revenge, but the moment the past stopped chasing me. The truth had come full circle. When the first jet roared into the air, its afterburner slicing through the dark, I whispered under my breath a final promise to the ones we lost, to the ones yet to come. Justice doesn't fade, it returns. And as the echo faded into the desert night, I finally let go. Honor can be taken, medals can be stripped, but truth never stays buried for long. It waits, patient, unyielding. I didn't tell this story to clear my name. I told it because somewhere out there, another soldier is carrying the weight of silence. Maybe she's watching this now. Maybe she's wondering if her voice still matters. I want her to know it does. Every whisper of truth, every quiet act of courage ripples farther than we can see. The Air Force once called me a traitor, then they called me a ghost, but ghosts are only dangerous when you try to forget them. I learned that justice doesn't always arrive in the ways we expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of persistence. Sometimes it wears the face of a survivor who refuses to look away. I am not proud of what I endured. I am proud of what I became after: a teacher, a witness, a woman who stopped waiting for permission to speak. If there's one thing the battlefield taught me, it's that the hardest wars are the ones fought in silence. But silence doesn't win, not forever. The truth always finds its way through the cracks. I am Ava Mercer, the Ghost Lieutenant, and I am still here for the ones who can't be. For the voices lost to fear, to bureaucracy, to time, because honor isn't given, it's remembered. If you believe some stories deserve to be heard, if you believe justice is worth the fight, then stand with us. Like, share, and subscribe to Military Revenge, where forgotten soldiers find their voice again. Justice doesn't fade, it returns.